Hello and welcome again to the Cat and the Parrot. Right, today I was doing a referral recently and I was talking to someone who was coming up with lots of acronyms and lots of interesting things, and they mentioned the toxic trio. What is that?
Okay, so it's interesting you say that because it was challenged a few years ago and called complex needs because families don't like the word toxic in the paperwork.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah.
So traditionally it was the substance misuse, domestic abuse and mental health.
Right.
So we know from lots and lots and lots of serious case reviews that they are factors that contribute towards risk if it's not managed well.
Right.
Okay. So we also know that the factors of the stress of parenting, family pressures, etc. So some are internal, some are external, based on what contributes towards it being part of that family.
Right.
And when they're asking you that, they're saying, is it current now, i.e., is it happening now?
Right.
Is there some evidence of those three? Or is there a history of it, i.e. non-recent time when this family were involved in it?
Right.
And then with that, we'll make a judgment on the now. But remembering, especially with all of those factors, they don't come, so some of them might have to be diagnosed, hence mental health, the diagnosis of that. Likewise, substance misuse, the diagnosis of someone being addicted or having a, addiction of some sort. So we know with some families that might be private hospital, private clinic.
Yeah.
You would never know.
No.
You don't go and tell people, oh, guess what, I've been diagnosed, I'm an official, you don't do that.
Yeah. Especially with schools. They're not going to, a parent isn't going to tell us, are they?
No. However, I remember I worked for a few rural boroughs in my time, Kerry, and I remember it being seen as trendy, i.e. recreational use.
Oh.
And then openly saying it's recreational use, which means if I told you it's recreational use, potentially I'm telling you that I'm in control of it. Right. And I know what I'm doing and I'm not addicted to it. Does that make sense? So it's just knowing where in some schools it will be seen as a drug addict. In some places, the language makes it a bit more glamorous as in recreational use. Yeah. So that's the substance misuse. And then also with domestic abuse, the massive taboo that comes with that, with stigma attached, etc., etc. And again, it's something where it's a massive void as far as young people explaining it, to the parent admitting it, to even when they've left the person, still happening. The control, emotional, blah blah blah. So it's just you as a school being aware of, have you got evidence? So yours is day to day, 5 days a week. What can I draw on right now that's telling me one of those three?
So what evidence, so let's go with parents that we think might have a mental health issue, but we're not really sure. They've not told us, but what evidence would we be looking for?
So I remember being an in-house social worker, I remember the language I used was, how are you coping? Does that make sense? So you in your role, being that frontline person, we assume we've got concerns about potential suspicions around mental health, but when we're working with families, by telling them how you're coping, we're going to get them to tell us how they think they're doing.
Right.
And then by their behavior of how they explain that to what we know is happening, we'll put the two together.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So people with personality disorders don't know they've got one.
No.
They really believe they're going above and beyond.
Yeah.
Whether it's controlling parent, protective parenting, or actually they're involved in their child's life to the point of.
Yes.
So it's something where, going back to personal values, the thin line between someone not understanding that, going back to our principles of the welfare of the child being paramount, we know that child development, child play, social emotional behaviour, blah, 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 children be more independent as they grow up. That parent may not recognise that child's going to become a young adult one day and be more independent. And that's where we tend to see the clash go on there.
Right.
So the child then becoming a bit more aggressive or a bit more rebellious. And that's when it highlights the whole thing about how they're controlling it. Does that make sense? So
so us as a school, we will have the parent phoning us up saying, my child's more aggressive. What can you do about it? And we're sitting there saying, well, this child in school is absolutely fine. Don't really know what's going on. And then we start to pick at it and think, actually,
absolutely.
It's more that the child is rebelling or trying to find their confidence or being a normal teenager. And that's where it's really tricky, isn't it?
Yeah, and there are certain patterns in those families. As you say that, I've got about 10 in my head, cha-ching, of mobility. So they'll tend to, the more you challenge, they'll just go somewhere else.
Yeah.
And then that child will be third school, blah, 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 whatever. Yeah. And then the classic would be the signs start happening. So when you bring the old school, they're in fear of that parent sometimes because of what they've experienced.
Yeah, I can relate.
And then, and then you've got to start from scratch. This time you kind of know.
Yeah.
And then within time, the problem doesn't go away. It just goes with you, as you know. And it's you.
Choose the language really carefully.
Absolutely.
You want to help the child. You don't want to make the parent, not want to support you. But sometimes you do have to be the bad person and say the things that no one else is wanting to say. And you feel slightly uncomfortable by saying something that maybe the parents would not want to hear, but you feel I've got to do what's best for the child and say, I feel slightly uncomfortable with what you just suggested. It can be hard, can't it?
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. So in the training that we have as social workers, there is a skill in, you can tell anyone news in a way that it comes across positive or in a structural manner.
Yeah.
So example of mental health. So the child will always be open and tell you transparency as far as what's really going on, right? Parents, they're better at playing the game.
Yeah.
Okay, we know that.
Yeah.
So once we know, for example, I think there's a few cases where the mother made out that it was all the father's fault and the boy was acting in a certain way because the father, blah, 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 rather than, or even malaria tablets. I remember this particular case, but it was one where the behaviour the boy was showing was anger towards his mum because mum was micromanaging, and he's at an age now in his third school where he just had enough, grew up, growth spurt overnight, and he wasn't having it anymore. So he was fighting back and he attacked mum.
All right.
But the point there was, it was a very affluent family where she was almost still loving up the boy for it, as in, I'm here to help him, but couldn't see it was her that was contributing towards that behaviour. And the classic there was us labelling and telling her that, wow, we are quite concerned that actually you are having this conflict, and we can support you with how we can support you with kind of resolving that with you and your son. So each time we were doing it in a way where we were sympathising with her, but at the same time being clear that what she was doing was actually contributing towards the frustrations of the son. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So within time, she could see, and the boy could see, that we understood, we were on his side, basically.
Yeah.
And that was helping him because we were the mediators, if that made sense. So and we knew that it wouldn't change because we knew that she couldn't help it. And that's why we did it as part of the process of referring it in.
So it's sympathy, but honesty.
Yes. So in that case, it was in my role when I was a safeguarding advisor as well as a manager for a social work team in education, safeguarding thing. It was one that was problematic, but because we knew the angle it was going, it was a matter of time before it became a crisis.
Yeah.
And when it came consistent with her almost suffocating him, not physically, but in the sense of threatening to put him in care, lock him in his room, all those things, it was very clear. Hold on, woohoo, this is dangerous now. And that's when we just escalated to section 47.
Okay.
But going back to your original question of the whole thing there about toxic trio, for that parent, it was definitely an undiagnosed personality disorder.
Yeah.
She was a city girl, bless her. She was a very, in a sense of very formal professional job. Yeah. In her day job, you would never know.
No.
Never know she had these challenges. Never know.
Yeah.
And that was the classic. I remember once when we had a counsellor, a local authority counsellor, who was also that person who the child went to a certain school, was talking about things at home. People thought it was all about a fantasy thing going on because we knew mum and she's a respectable person in the community. Yeah. And actually, it was true what she was saying. Almost like the woman had a personality disorder again in a fantasy world of grandeur. It's the grandeur thing when actually behind closed doors, she was very sad and very experienced in mental health, but did it very well for a long time. Yeah. And it took a 13-year-old daughter to speak out to a point where it didn't match this family at all.
Yeah.
And when we did a home visit, I remember the house was in squalor almost. So everything was on her image and herself rather than what her home was.
So it's the outside, what the outside world can see.
Yeah. So that's just a flavour of, I suppose, the reality of it.
That's interesting. That's really interesting. Thank you. I've enjoyed that little session.
No problem.
Thank you very much. Bye.
All right, thank you.